My name is Scot McKnight, and I am a professor of New Testament at Northern Seminary in the western suburbs of Chicago, and I've been teaching for 40 years.
Dr. Scot McKnight. Scott, good to see you. Welcome to Exegetically Speaking.
Good to be with you, David.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to do these because I always learn something, and that's what's great. I learn from both Old Testament and New Testament people. So, how did you get started reading Greek? Let's start with that.
You ready for this one?
Uh-huh.
I started teaching myself Greek when I was in high school. I
Really?
went to my youth pastor and I said I want to learn Greek, and he gave me a little grammar. I think it was published by Moody Press by Ray Summers.
Oh, yeah.
And I started just going through the text. And the funny thing is, I didn't have anybody to tell me a thing. I didn't talk to anybody, so I called it an aorist tense for a long time. And then when I went to college, I wanted to take Greek my first year as a freshman. They wouldn't let freshmen in beginning Greek. So I waited till I was a sophomore. And so I took a Greek course, I believe, every semester in college from my sophomore year on. And I had translated most of the New Testament, but knew not a thing about syntax. It was just all translation of words and, so I translated a lot. And then when I went to Trinity, I studied Greek. And then I think it all began to stick when I got to teach it as a professor.
Isn't that interesting how when you teach things begin to just pull together and crystallize?
Yeah.
What was sort of a little fuzzy, maybe on the margins, it comes right together. It's a beautiful thing when that happens. I've had a lot of aha moments when I'm teaching.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you first start teaching. When I first started teaching Greek, they'd ask a question. I'd think, I have no idea. I have no idea. So I'd have to go investigate this. Or they'd ask it from a peculiar angle, and you'd have to rethink what you were talking about, and it would help clarify. So
Yeah.
I love teaching Greek.
Well, I do too. It's fun. We teach that actually here at the library. I teach layman on Tuesday nights, and we're reading First John now, and we've read Didache and some other things, kind of some more of the easier Greek around. But we're going deeper. So that's a lot of fun.
Good.
All right, you and Cody Matchett have written a terrific book called Revelation for the rest of us, a prophetic call to follow Jesus as a dissident disciple. I would recommend it. Beth Allison Barr says it's the most powerful interpretation of Revelation she's ever read. So that's pretty high praise, no doubt. So, but we're going to talk about Revelation. I think maybe this is the first, we've done over 200 podcasts, exegetically speaking. And I think this is the first time we've done anything in the book of Revelation.
Well, I'm not surprised. A lot of people don't like the Greek of the book of Revelation to begin with.
It's a little bit funky here and there. Yeah, so what are we looking at, Scott? Let's set it up for us.
Yeah, if you're on the island of Patmos, you probably don't care too much about Greek grammar. It's too beautiful. Well, this is the sort of the introduction to the book, and I think that there's some interesting dimensions of the Greek in this passage that can draw us out of our familiarity. David, I have a translation of the New Testament coming out in a couple months called the Second Testament with InterVarsity. And one of my goals was to knock us about because of our familiarity. We see a text and we think we know what it means. We translate it with familiar words and we don't hear some of what's going on in these texts. So, for instance, in this text, it starts out with three words. Apocalypsis Jesu Christu, which we usually translate a revelation of Jesus Christ. The NIV translates it a revelation from Jesus Christ. Well, that's not what the Greek says. There is a Greek word for from, and they didn't use it. John doesn't use it. So I like to knock about or just kind of push against familiar readings. And I don't translate the word apocalypsis with the word revelation. I use the word apocalypse.
Leave it untranslated.
Yeah, because I think that word has meaning in our society, and revelation, we've been using it for so much. It's the title of the book. So it doesn't have that kind of cachet that it had in the first century. And then Jesu Christu, we call these genitives, and it doesn't define, genitive defines that there's a relationship between the revelation or the apocalypse and Jesus Christ. It doesn't tell us what that relationship is. We insert our categories. So I translate this a Jesus Christ revelation or a Jesus Christ apocalypse. So it's got the feel that the Greek has. We don't get the definition that the NIV I think is too specific. Some people would say it's a revelation about Jesus Christ,
Mm-hmm.
which is possible.
Mm-hmm.
So also from, but it doesn't say that either. There are prepositions that could be used to define that.
Define that.
So
So
I like
you leave
to
it a little undefined then.
exactly because it is undefined,
Mm.
and I want to. But it's very interesting that when the NIV and I'm always thinking about the NIV because of the work I'm doing right now on everyday Bible studies, which is always on the basis of the NIV, that there is an expression, and right now I'm having trouble seeing this text where it talks about Jesus Christ. Oh, here it is in verse 2, who testified to the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
And here they leave it as sort of a testimony of Jesus Christ, like it's about, but it's
Uh-huh.
virtually the same genitive construction.
It is,
So
exactly, yeah.
I have a Jesus Christ witness. So I leave it the same way. And I think not knowing and not defining it forces us to see the Greek the way the Greek works rather than to spend our time saying, now, what kind of genitive is this? I've taught all those genitives.
Mm-hmm.
One time I built a list of 31 different kinds of genitives.
My students would be horrified to hear that.
The thing about it is, it's there aren't 31 kinds of genitives. There are lots of relationships that show up when you use a genitive, and what are they? And it's that discernment, it's that sense that we have of how a genitive works. And I don't think John wants any more definition than that. And a Jesus Christ testimony or witness could have several meanings. And when people read it that way, they say, I wonder what that means. Does it mean this? And I think we're doing exactly what John wants us to do in that.
Oh.
Oh, the other one, this is something that Nijay Gupta and I have talked about quite a bit. Nijay is pretty sensitive to the social context,
Mm-hmm.
but John says a revelation of Jesus Christ or the Jesus Christ revelation, which God gave to him to show to, and the translations are usually to his servants. Well, the Greek word is doulos, slaves. And the NIV and most English translations don't like to use the word slave, so they avoid it. But Nijay was very insistent with me, and I'd already started doing this, so I translate this to his slaves. And John is not a servant, he's a slave, and we are slaves to God. And I had a professor, Murray Harris, who has a wonderful book, Slaves of Christ with Zondervan, which emphasizes the significance of the Christian life as slavery to God. And this revelation was then given to John, the slave, his slave John. So those are some things that just this morning I was working on this text and I was looking at the NIV and I thought, I don't know. It's not like the NIV I think is wrong. I think they're fine.
Right.
It's a good translation, but just there's some things that we could do that might make people get knocked about in their familiarity and go, I've never heard it that way. Make us think about the text in a different way.
I think sometimes, Scott, translations get in ruts, and they sort of stick with things because it sounds familiar and they don't want to kind of move beyond that. But in this case, it's going too far in defining a relationship, it sounds like. Let's leave that an undefined relationship and let the story that's coming play out. Is this a revelation from Jesus Christ, or is it a revelation about Jesus Christ, or maybe a little bit of both? I don't know. So we'll see.
I think it is both. It's clearly is both. But John doesn't say it explicitly either way. And I often have said to myself in reading translations, there is a Greek word for this. If John wanted to use it, he could have used it.
And his Greek is
apa
good
or
enough.
Ek work, apa or ek work very, very well.
Yeah,
and they're not there. So in translating, I think one of the things I'm following John Goldingay in many ways in his First Testament is I want to sort of disturb people's familiarity, give them a fresh angle on the text. And what you said in ruts is very, very important. because once we get used to a word meaning something, we no longer see the meaning of the word. It just becomes so familiar to us that we need to be upset at times, and not in a bad sense, but just we need to have a different word. And then when we see a different word, witness instead of testimony, apocalypse instead of revelation, season instead of time, observe instead of keep, changing the translation to a less common translation can force us to think that the minority translations can actually shed new light on the text.
Terrific stuff. Dr. Scot McKnight, thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Thank you, David.
If you learned too much today and your head is hurting, there's one sure cure. That is to share this podcast with a friend. We hope you've enjoyed Exegetically Speaking. If you have never visited Wheaton College, I hope you'll make plans to do so. We have a wonderful campus year-around. And if biblical languages are your fancy, check out our MA and BA programs at Wheaton College, wheaton.edu. Look for modern and classical languages. That's the best place to get started. If you have comments, you have questions, you just want to be in touch, please email us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for all those who make this possible. You know who you are. Until next time, thanks for listening.